Welcome to the Marine Environmental Education Center. We are a partnership between Nova Southeastern University and Broward County Parks. So we are part historic home and part environmental center. We're open to the public where people can come in and view the historic home from the 1960s. We can also check out our interactive cabana center, and then we have our resident green sea turtle captain. We also have 3 little turtles upstairs, so they have become our conservation ambassadors. So they are animals that were either injured or they were someone's pets and they can no longer survive in the wild by themselves. So they are living out the rest of their lives with us. And again, just trying to be an educational resource about these awesome species we have here in Florida. So today we're going to be talking all about Captain, our resident green sea turtle. So we'll start just a little bit about why Captain's here, her injuries, her history, and then we'll go into general sea turtle ecology, biology, conservation, and we'll also touch on nesting. So we're going to get started with Captain. So anytime we talk about an animal, my favorite way to start is really, really broad, and then based on its characteristics, we can then narrow it down till we get to a specific species. So the first question we want to ask ourselves, is it a vertebrate or an invertebrate? And those 2 words just mean, does the animal have a backbone or no backbone? So if you're not sure what a vertebrate is, you can take your hand, put it in the middle of your back, rub up and down. You guys feel that bumpy thing? That's your backbone. So us humans, we are vertebrates. We have 5 major groups of vertebrates. We have mammals, we have birds, fish, reptiles, and amphibians. So today we're talking about a sea turtle, which is going to be a reptile. So our reptiles include snakes, lizards, gators, and turtles and tortoises. So Captain does have a backbone just like us, but we kind of differ from there. So there are 4 major characteristics that all reptiles have. The first thing is that their skin is covered in scales. So as Captain comes by, you might see the top of her shell, her carapace, and those kind of circular shapes on her. Those are her scales. Now sea turtles, they have modified scales called scutes. The scales are very noticeable on her head and on her front flippers. Or if we think of a snake, especially when they shed their skin, they have very scaly skin. As mammals, we have fur or hair covering our skin. So we have arm hair, we have hair on our head. If you think of cats and dogs, their bodies are covered in fur. So we're a little bit different from our reptiles. One thing that we do, the same thing that reptiles do, is that we breathe air using lungs. So Captain has lungs just like us. All of our reptiles have lungs, but they are a little bit better at holding their breath than we are, and we'll talk about that later on. So we have skin covered in scales. They use lungs to breathe. The third thing that makes a reptile is that they lay eggs. So mama reptile, whenever she's ready to reproduce, she'll make her nest, she'll deposit her eggs in there, and then depending on the species, mama reptile might protect the nest, or mama reptile might go out to the ocean and never to see her babies again. It kind of depends. Now the fourth thing that all reptiles, or the common characteristic that all reptiles have, is that they are cold-blooded, or they are ectotherms. So what it means to be cold-blooded or to be an ectotherm means your internal temperature matches whatever the external temperature is doing. So for Captain, we have a saltwater pool right here, and we have a certain range we like to keep it in because whatever the outside temperature is doing is going to affect her. So in the cold winter, so like those 4 days out of the year where it actually gets cold in Florida, if the pool cools down, Captain's internal temperature is going to lower. And when it's hot in Florida, like right now in the middle of summer, as the pool heats up, Captain's internal temperature is going to heat up. So has anyone ever seen a lizard or a gator or a snake in the morning sunning themselves on a rock, getting nice and warm? That's because at nighttime, it cools down. So in the morning, they can't just jump up and start their day. They have to warm themselves up. Now that's different from us humans, us mammals, because we are endotherms or warm-blooded. So what that means, our body is set at a certain degree, a certain temperature, and if we get too hot, our body has a response to help cool us off. And if we get too cold, our body does something to help warm us back up. So our internal temperature is usually at 98.6, and if we get too hot, we start to sweat. And if we get too cold, we actually start to shiver, and our muscles shivering and working actually generates heat to warm us back up. So the 4 common characteristics that all reptiles have: scaly skin, they breathe air just like us using lungs, they lay eggs, and they are cold-blooded, or they are ectotherms. So now we're going to talk about Captain. You can cut that, right? So now we're gonna talk about Captain, our resident green sea turtle. So you'll notice I'm using this the purple target and these tongs. So Captain is conditioned to know when the purple target appears in the water, snacks appear. Captain really only loves two things in life. The first thing is breakfast, and the second thing is dinner time. So she's very food motivated, just like us. So this makes it really easy for us. We have a very large pool. If we need her to come up to us, if we need to adjust her backpack, if the vet's coming, if we have to evacuate her for a hurricane, it's really easy for her to come up to us once we drop this target in the water, because she knows snacks appear. She's very food motivated. And then you'll notice I'm using these tongs. So I came into work with 10 fingers today, and I want to leave with these 10 fingers. So I use this just for my safety and Captain's safety, because she has a very sharp beak. So she has a serrated beak, kind of like a steak knife. And these tongs just prevent my fingers from being hurt. So she is very used to us just dropping this in, and as she takes a lap, she'll come, once this is in the water, she'll come right up to us, and we'll go from there. So Captain is between the ages of 17 and 19. She was struck by a boat back in 2010, and she was hit on the top of her shell, or the top of her carapace. Now remember, we talked about how she's a vertebrate, right? She has a backbone. That backbone, the spinal cord runs right along inside that backbone. So her backbone runs right along the middle of her shell, and that's where she was struck. So she has a couple issues because she was struck right on that backbone. Just like us, if you do have damage to your spinal cord, you could become partially paralyzed, and that's what happened to Captain. So one of the biggest issues she has is that she is partially paralyzed. She does not have full mobility of those back flippers, and you'll notice it as she comes by and she swims. She pulls really hard with her front flippers, and then her back legs just kind of hang out there. The other thing that got damaged when that boat hit her spinal cord is her digestive system. So she does have some digestive issues. She has to have some medicine. So you'll notice I'm making these little lettuce roll-ups. So Captain, because she is partially paralyzed, we do give her a fiber pill just to keep everything kind of moving and grooving inside of her. And we also give her what's essentially Gas X, so to prevent any extra gas bubbles. So if she doesn't go to the bathroom for a couple days, just like us, that's not good, and we have to call the vet. So we want to make sure with all this fibrous plant material she's eating, that everything is just being processed through and that she's staying happy and healthy. So the major issue that Captain got from that boat strike was buoyancy issues. So you'll notice she has this black backpack on top of her. So like I said, she was hit in 2010 up near Jacksonville, so northern Florida. She was hit towards the end of her carapace right here. Now when boat strikes happen, air bubbles usually get into the back of the sea turtle shell. So when they found her, she was washed ashore. They actually sent her to rehab over in Jekyll Island, Georgia, at the Georgia Sea Turtle Center. So when they brought her in, they were like, okay, she's got this prominent boat strike. We know she has buoyancy issues. Let's see what we can do to help get her back into the wild. Because every goal of a rehab facility is to get the animal nice and healthy so that they can release it back into the wild. So she actually spent 3 years there, and what they did with her was dive therapy. So what that means is that the Captain just practiced diving down to work that air bubble out of her shell. So she was there for 3 years. After 3 years of dive therapy, they were like, wow, she looks great. Let's go ahead and release her. So anytime an animal washes up, they do tag the animal. So you'll notice she has these 2 tags in her front flippers, and she also has a pit tag or a microchip. So very similar to what we put in our cats and our dogs in her shoulder. The reason for this, like I said, every goal of a rehab facility is to release them. But if something were to happen and the animal were to wash up again, they'd be able to quickly identify that animal. So after 3 years, they released Captain, and about 3 weeks later, she washed up again, this time in St. Augustine, Florida. Now remember, she has those tags in her, so they were able to identify what turtle it was, so they knew it was Captain, they knew it was a green sea turtle, they knew she was struck by a boat in 2010, and she had a lot of buoyancy issues. So this time they decided to send her over to Moat Marine Lab in Sarasota on the west coast of Florida. There they have deeper pools, so they were hoping with more dive therapy they'd be able to work those bubbles out and she could be a neutrally buoyant turtle. So she has this black backpack on, and there's a little bit of weight in the back of that backpack. So without that backpack on, Captain has what we call bubble butt. So all those micro bubbles in the back of her shell gives her a little bit more buoyancy in her tail, and her face is down. Now remember, they breathe air just like us, so they need to surface to breathe. So the amount of energy that Captain uses without that backpack on to come up to the surface to breathe is a lot. And then she could get stressed out, and we don't want that to happen. So the weighted backpack just keeps her nice and neutrally buoyant in the water. At Moat Marine Lab, they did a little bit more of an in-depth survey of her insides. So they did an MRI, they did an X-ray. They actually put a microscope down her throat to figure out what was going on. And while she was there, that's when they determined she was a non-releasable turtle. Her injuries were so severe that she could not survive in the wild by herself. Mostly the buoyancy issues, but also that partial paralysis. So they needed to find a forever home for her. While she was at Moat Marine Lab, she developed this behavior of eating anything in her enclosure, which included things on the bottom like rocks and sand. Now sea turtles, especially our green sea turtles, since they eat seagrass, they do eat some sand naturally just from tearing up the seagrass, but they shouldn't be eating it the way that Captain started to eat it at Moat Marine Lab. So it actually started clogging up her digestive system, and the vet had to come, and it just didn't end well for her. So when we were coming up as a facility in 2017, you write what kind of pool you have. We have a bare bottom pool, and when we said what kind of pool we had, the FWC contacted us, and they were like, we have a turtle for you. So we actually have a bare bottom pool just for Captain safety. Again, she did develop that behavior of eating sand and rocks, and it's not good for the digestive system. So that's why she's here with us, and that's why we have this nice aqua bare bottom pool. So Captain is a resident green sea turtle. She is between 17 and 19 years old, and she's gonna live out the rest of her life with us. So she can live anywhere from 80 to 100 years old. So she's got a long life ahead of her. Now, as a green sea turtle, they are vegetarians. So out in the wild, they'll eat seagrass and algae. Here, we give her a mixture of leafy green, romaine, cucumber, and green pepper. The reason why we do that, there was a study done a few years ago that shows the macronutrients in these 4 vegetables is most similar to her natural diet out in the wild, which would be seagrass and algae. So you guys remember those lettuce roll-ups I was giving her? We also give her 2 other things other than the fiber and the Gas-X. We give her calcium to help build up her shell and get it nice and strong again. And we also give her a multivitamin. So any micronutrients she's not getting from her food, she'll get it from that vitamin. Nice job, pretty girl. So like I said, sea turtles, our green sea turtles have a serrated beak. They actually don't have teeth at all. So each species, their beak is adapted for their diet. Now we have 7 species of sea turtle in the world. We get 5 off the coast of Florida, and 3 of those 5 nest on our beaches here. So the leatherback nests on our beach, the loggerhead, and then the green sea turtle. So those 3 nest on our beaches here in Broward County. Florida is a very important nesting site for our sea turtles, and specifically for our loggerheads, and I'll talk more about that once we talk about nesting season. So I'm going to talk about the leatherbacks first. So leatherbacks are really cool because they are the largest out of all 7 species. They can grow to be anywhere from 7 to 8 feet long and up to 2,000 pounds. So if anyone has ever seen a Volkswagen Bug, the car, it's kind of shaped like a ladybug with these funky eyes. That's kind of what a leatherback looks like out of the water. They are massive. They are the largest out of all 7 species. But what's really cool about them is that they are the only soft shell species of sea turtle. The other 6 are going to be hard shell. Now there's a reason why that leatherback has that soft shell. They love eating deep water jellyfish. That is their favorite thing to eat. Now deep water jellies, as you dive down into the ocean, the pressure gets greater, right? So if anyone's ever dove down before, they've had to like pop their ears because the pressure gets too much. So leatherbacks, they have that soft shell because it allows them, as they dive down, to compress their bodies so that they can eat their favorite snacks, and then when they come back up to the surface to breathe, they can then expand where the pressure isn't as strong at the surface of the water. So leatherbacks, they love eating deep water jellies, but jellyfish are slimy, right? So they actually, their beak is adapted. They have 2 hooks on their beak so that when they do eat the jelly, those hooks, they act like vampire fangs so that the jelly won't fall out of their mouth. Now jellyfish sting, right? They're related to our corals and our anemones, so they have stinging cells called nematocysts. So the leatherback actually has an adapted throat to help, or esophagus to help them swallow that jelly. They have these finger-like projections called papillae in their throat that help push the jellyfish down into their stomach, but also prevents them from getting stung. I think it's amazing because they eat an animal that stings them, but their throat's like, I'll save you, don't worry. So it's really cool that those leatherbacks have that adaptation. So like I said, the leatherbacks are the largest. They are the only soft shell species of turtle, and that is because they dive really, really, really deep into those deep ocean waters just to eat those jellies. Now the other 6 species are going to be hard shell, and our green sea turtle is going to be the largest out of the hard shell. So green sea turtles can grow to be anywhere from 3 to 4 feet long, and they can grow up to 400 pounds. Right now, Captain Plankton. Like I said, she's between the ages of 17 and 19. She is about 2 feet long and close to 65 pounds. And they don't reach full size. They aren't considered adults until 35 years old. So she's got a lot more growing to do. And they live forever, right? So reptiles, they're very long living and they are slow growing. Slow growing also means that they're slow healers. So that's why Captain spent so much time in rehab. Now we talked about the diet of a green sea turtle. They love eating seagrass and algae out in the wild. That serrated bill or beak acts like a steak knife. So they actually trim the seagrass down. They don't rip it out by the roots. They just trim it down. Their nicknames are the lawnmower of the sea because they actually stimulate growth. Good job, pretty girl. They are the only vegetarian species. Now the third species that nests on our beach here are the loggerheads. Now those guys have these huge heads. They're very, very large. And the reason why they have large heads is for these 2 strong jaw muscles to attach to. So they have 2 strong jaw muscles that attach to their skull, their really large skull, and they have a very sharp beak to help then crack open the shells of their prey. They love eating bivalves, so our 2-shelled organisms like our clams, scallops, mussels, and oysters. They also love eating crabs and lobsters, so they have that hard shell as well. So the large jaw muscles and the beak allows the loggerhead to crack open those shells and eat the soft body animal on the inside. Now sea turtle nesting season is a huge deal here in Florida. Sea turtle nesting season runs from March 1st through October 31st. And each species, those 3 that we talked about, they stagger of when they come up. So leatherbacks start nesting season for us. They come up around March, and then they start laying their nest. Loggerheads, they come up around May and June, and they start laying their nest. And then green sea turtles, they're the last ones to arrive, and they actually show up during July and August. So kind of peak hurricane season for us, right? So green sea turtles, because they are so late in the season, they've actually adapted to build their nest as high up, as close to the dunes as possible. Because if there is a hurricane that comes, that storm surge could wash out the nest. So green sea turtles, mama green sea turtles have adapted to crawl as far up as they can to lay those eggs to give their nest the best chance of surviving during hurricane season. Now, mama sea turtle, when she's an adult, around age 35, she's able to reproduce. So mama sea turtle, when she's ready, she comes up to the beach at nighttime. So those back flippers, remember how Captain's are partially paralyzed, so she does full mobility? Those back flippers help mama sea turtle crawl up to the sand, and then those back flippers are what dig the nest for her. So it's shaped like an upside down light bulb, so really narrow at the top, and then it opens up, and that's where she'll deposit her eggs. She will lay anywhere from 80 to 100 eggs at a time. Then she'll actually crawl up that nest, or close up that nest, and crawl back to the ocean. And that's actually the last time she will ever see her babies, because sea turtles are born knowing everything they need to know. They have that blueprint in their brain of like, okay, this is what it means to be a sea turtle. I hatch, I crawl to the surface, I crawl to the ocean, I swim, right? As mammals, us humans, we are born not knowing a lot of things, right? As a baby, we really know how to cry, we know how to eat, we know how to go to the bathroom. So as mammals, we actually spend anywhere from 18-ish years hanging out with our parents or guardians so that they could teach us all the things, right? And then we continue learning as we keep growing. These guys, a little different than us, they have no parental care. So mama sea turtle will actually never see her babies again after she lays that nest, because they're just born knowing what to do, what it means to be a sea turtle. Now, something that's really cool about mama sea turtle is that she can lay anywhere from 2 to 8 nests in a nesting season. And she actually will nest every other year. So in 2020, whatever females nested this year, they're actually gonna take 2021 off, and then they will nest again in 2022. Now that 2 to 8 nests is really important, because that means she's laying anywhere from 200 to 800 eggs in a nesting season. That is very important because sea turtle hatchlings only have about a 1 in 1,000 chance of survival to adulthood. And we'll talk about some of their major threats in a moment. So now, once mama sea turtle lays the eggs in the nest and crawls back to the ocean, those eggs will actually stay in the nest for about 2 months. That's called the incubation period. And during those 2 months, the eggs will continue to develop, and then when they're ready to hatch, they will hatch. Now, if you guys have heard the saying, hot chicks and cool dudes, so for all reptiles, the sex of the eggs depends on the temperature of the nest. So colder temperatures, so 72 degrees and lower, will give us more males, and warmer temperatures, 78 degrees and higher, will give us more females. If it's in between that 72 to 78 range, it'll be a good mixture of both. Now, that is something that scientists are actively studying, Because as the planet is warming, does that mean we're going to have more females? And if we have more females and not many males happening or being born, what's that going to do to our sea turtle populations? So that's something that scientists are actively studying, just because they know that is something that our sea turtles could have an issue with in the upcoming years, because all 7 species are either endangered or threatened. Their populations aren't doing very well, and a lot of it has to do with what we're doing on Earth. So those little hatchlings, they spend 2 months in the nest, that incubation period, and after 2 months at nighttime, those little hatchlings will begin to hatch. So they actually begin to hatch, they kind of crawl up, and as they start to crawl up, the sand kind of goes underneath them and pushes them up like an elevator. So eventually those hatchlings get to the top of the surface. Then the little hatchlings will look for the brightest thing in the sky at nighttime, reflecting off the water, because that's what they know is safe. So usually the brightest thing in the sky at nighttime is going to be the moon. So the hatchlings, when they get to the surface, they look for the moon reflecting off the water, and they know, since they're born knowing everything, that's where I'm going. And then they'll crawl to the ocean. Now their journey's not over yet, because once they get to the ocean, they actually swim for 48 hours straight, so 2 whole days they're swimming. They're trying to get out to the Sargassum Sea, which is that giant patch of the Sargassum algae we get floating on our beaches here. It's that brown-green algae that has the circular floats, hangs out in these huge patches. So because of the way the ocean currents work, there's a huge collection of it in between us, the US, in between the Caribbean, and in between Central and South America. And that's where our little hatchlings are trying to get, for 2 reasons. One, since they're tiny, they're the size of my palm when they're born, they're bite-sized. They're nicknamed for the chicken nuggets of the sea because everything likes to eat them. So they're trying to get to that algae patch just so they can hide. They can hide from their predators, they can camouflage, they can blend in, and hopefully get some protection and they won't be eaten. They also will try to eat as much as they can, because they're trying to grow. Because once they reach about captain size, if not bigger, a lot of things aren't a lot of natural things aren't a big threat to them anymore. So when they're on land, so when they're in the nest, they are a huge prey item for a lot of our predators, including bobcats, foxes, dogs, raccoons. Ghost crabs will go after them, fire ants will go after them, humans will go after them as well. There are some island cultures that believe that sea turtle eggs have a medicinal value to them, but it's not true, they don't. Here in the US, they are federally protected, so you are not allowed to hunt, harass, kill, bother, touch any live sea turtle, and you're not allowed to mess with the nest either. So here in Broward County, we have the Broward County Sea Turtle Conservation Program. That is an organization that is up and down the beach during nesting season at all times, and they're the ones who make sure when Mama Sea Turtle comes up, nobody's messing with them. And once Mama Sea Turtle lays that egg, or lays the nest, they'll actually mark off the nest with the 4 wooden stakes and the pink tape, just to keep those guys safe. Good job, pretty girl. So once they make it to the surface, they then have to get to the ocean, like I said, and since they are bite-sized, a lot of things like to eat them. So fish will go after them, seagulls will go after them, ospreys could go after them, sharks will go after them. A lot of things like to eat these guys because they're so tiny and they're bite-sized. Now, once they reach captain size, and once they reach full grown as well, nothing really goes after them other than sharks. So sharks are going to be their natural predator once they're full grown. Now, turtles swim fast, but sharks are actually faster, but only in one direction, which is straight. Now, sea turtles have adapted to avoid their predators, and the way they do that are those back legs. So since Captain is partially paralyzed, that's another reason why she can't be released, because if a turtle is being chased by a shark, a healthy turtle, they actually will move those back flippers, and it acts like a rudder of a boat, so it can make really tight turns and outmaneuver the shark. So if a turtle is being chased by a shark, and then all of a sudden it's like, goodbye, the shark's like, whoa, 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 come back here. Because the shark isn't very fast when it has to turn and go catch the turtle. Now sharks, I'm going to tell you a secret. You can't tell the sharks I said this, but sharks are very lazy. That's why we always hear about them going after something that's injured, dying, or old, because it's going to be an easier catch for them. They don't have to waste as much energy. So if a healthy turtle is outmaneuvering the shark after a couple times, the shark's just going to give up because it's not worth spending all that energy trying to catch an animal that fast when they can go find something that's injured. So for the most part, their natural predators are going to be sharks, but if they are healthy enough, they will be able to avoid them. So the one way that they avoid their sharks are using those back flippers like rudders of a boat. The second way, they kind of have a built-in shield, right? Think of that shell, think of that carapace. It's made up of keratin, so what we find in our fingernail and our hair. So if a sea turtle is being chased by a shark, another thing they could do, they will actually turn on their side and use that shell like a shield, which is really cool. So because that shell is very hard, the shark can't bite into them. Good job, pretty girl. Now, sea turtles, both our hatchlings and our adult sea turtles, the biggest threat to them are going to be humans. So what we're doing, with a lot of things on this planet, a lot of our actions are affecting not only our land environment, but also our ocean environment. So one of the biggest threats to our hatchlings is light pollution. So here in Florida, during sea turtle nesting season, we have what we call turtle time. So at 9 p.m., if you live along the coast, you have to turn your lights off, or you have to get those special orange colored lights. Sea turtles cannot see the color red or orange really well. And remember, they're looking for the brightest thing in the sky at nighttime. So if it's a new moon or if it's cloudy outside and the hatchlings begin to hatch, what are they gonna look for? Now let's say I live on the beach and I have my back porch light on. Those hatchlings, they're gonna get disoriented, right? They're gonna go to the brightest light because that's what they think is the safest. Now if the moon's not out, but my back porch light is on, those hatchlings are gonna crawl from the beach to my back porch. And it might be really cool and awesome to have those hatchlings on my back porch, but the amount of energy that they spent to get from there to my back porch, to then get back to the ocean, to then swim for 2 days straight is a lot, right? Remember, a 1 in 1,000 chance of survival to adulthood. So we try to have those turtle-friendly lights. If anyone's been to the Hollywood Broadwalk, they have those orange-colored lights just to help our turtles. A lot of the homes along the beach here have those orange-colored lights just to help these guys, because we want to make it as easy as possible for them to get to the ocean because the odds are stacked against them so harshly. Another threat to our sea turtles is coastal development. So as humans, we love building along the coast. We love our beachfront homes. But as we're knocking down those dune systems and as we're building along the coast and putting more humans in that area, that kind of takes away those nesting spots for our females. So one really cool thing about our female sea turtles is that when they're adults, so whatever beach they're born on, they crawl to the ocean, and when they're ready to reproduce, so 30 to 35 years later, they actually return to a similar stretch of beach that they were born on. And that's because of the magnetic fields in their brain. So when they are hatching and when they're crawling, their brains, their magnetic field is sensing where they are, so they'll return to a similar stretch of beach. That doesn't mean if a sea turtle was born right outside our path here at the MEEC, that doesn't mean they'll come right back to the spot, but there's a good chance they'll be somewhere in Hollywood or in Fort Lauderdale, which is super cool. So the biggest issue that's affecting not only our sea turtles, but all of our animals is pollution, right? So plastic pollution is a huge issue. Marine debris is a huge issue for all of our sea creatures. About 90% of all marine species have some form of plastic in them, and that is completely our fault. So when we think of trash, we fill up our kitchen trash bag. Once it's full, we tie it, we put it into our garbage can outside, or we put it into a dumpster. A truck comes by and takes it, and then we don't know what happens to it, right? A lot of that trash actually goes to a landfill. Now, as that plastic trash can or trash bag sits in the sun, because it takes a while for us to process the trash in the landfill, the sun begins to break down that trash bag. It could split open, and then rain or wind could take that plastic pollution, and it could run off with the rain, or the breeze could take it, and it could end up in a river. Now, all rivers lead to the ocean because all water on Earth is connected. So all rivers lead to the ocean. So just because trash on land ends up in the river, that means there's a really good chance it's going to end up in the ocean. Now, once it gets to the ocean, the sun is still breaking it down. That's called photodegrade. And it will also be broken down by salt and by the waves. So by just like that motion of the ocean, right? And they start breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces. Now, remember those hatchlings I talked to you about before? How after they hatch, they crawl to the ocean, they swim for 48 hours straight out to that giant patch of algae, that sargassum sea, hiding from predators and eating whatever fits into their mouth? What do you guys think a lot of them are starting to eat now? Bite-sized pieces. Plastic! Yeah, they're starting to eat that plastic, right? So if anyone saw the photo that went viral back in October of 2019, it was of a little hatchling. Our friends up in Gumbo Limbo Nature Center, which is in Boca, they found this hatchling that unfortunately didn't make it. It was about this big. And they decided to do a necropsy, which is an animal version of an autopsy. So they were looking at its insides to try to figure out how come this hatchling didn't make it. And when they opened up its stomach, they found over 100 pieces of plastic in it. So those hatchlings, because they're bite-sized and they're just going to eat whatever goes by them, they don't know the difference between plastic and food. So as they fill up on plastic, their body's like, okay, I'm full, and their brain's like, all right, we're gonna stop eating, but their body can't process that plastic, so it just sits in their stomach, right? And those chemicals could leach into them, but most of the time, since their stomach is full of that plastic, they stop eating, but they don't get any nutrients from that plastic pollution. So a lot of our animals are threatened by that plastic pollution. Another big issue is ghost fishing gear or derelict fishing gear. So that's basically any fishing gear, so including our lines, our hooks, our nets, that have been lost to the ocean, and since no human is using them, they just kind of fall to the bottom, but they still actively catch animals. So a lot of our coral will be smothered by them. Sea turtles will get stuck in nets. Dolphins will get stuck in nets. Sharks, things like that. They might get some of the line tangled on them. So a lot of that derelict fishing gear or that ghost fishing gear is causing a huge problem for all of our marine sea creatures. So one way that we can be better humans to not only help our land environment, but our ocean environment, is to get rid of those single-use plastics. So the single-use water bottles, the single-use straws, the single-use plastic bags, the single-use coffee cups, things like that. If we start going away from that, that's gonna create less trash for our landfill, right? And then that lowers the risk of those single-use plastics being swept by the wind or with the runoff to then get to a river, which leads to our ocean. So one great thing you guys can invest in are these reusable water bottles. You buy them once and you're just gonna consistently use them over and over and over again, right? You're never gonna throw them out. Same thing with the plastic straws, the plastic bags, the coffee cups, things like that. So limiting our single-use plastics is a huge thing that we can do, and we can hold ourselves accountable to help our sea turtles, to help our ocean environment, and to help our land environment as well. There are 7.8+ billion people on this planet, right? And we need everyone to get on board. So we need to start educating everyone about the dangers of those single-use plastics, about the garbage patches we have in our ocean. Because a healthy ocean means a healthy planet, right? Because Earth, if you think about it, it's 70% water. So most of it is salt water, most of it is ocean. And it's kind of like a security blanket for us. And we need to take care of it because it helps us with so many different things. Oh, here she comes, she's ready. All right, so circling back to Captain's breathing. It's almost on cue. There she is, she always knows. So we talked about how reptiles, they breathe air just like us using lungs, but they are actually way better at holding their breath than we are. So if Captain's hanging out, doing her thing, she can hold her breath anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. If she's working really hard, she can hold her breath anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And when she's ready to take a nap, she will actually take a big deep breath in, she'll dive down to the bottom of the pool, and she can hold her breath for up to 4 hours, which is crazy to me. I can hold my breath for like 30 seconds, maybe 40 seconds if I'm really trying. She can hold her breath for up to 4 hours. There have been reports of sea turtles holding their breath for up to 7 hours. So they're just a lot better at holding their breath than we are. Good job, girl. So circling back to the Broward County Sea Turtle Conservation Program, those are the ones that are up and down the beach during sea turtle nesting season, marking off those nests, making sure the nests are staying safe, and making sure when Mama Sea Turtle comes up, no one's really bothering her. They had started about 35 years ago, and 2019 was actually the best nesting season on record. Remember how I told you those sea turtles, those hatchlings, they returned to a similar stretch of beach after 35 years? So that coincides with 35 years ago when the program started. So it shows that our conservation efforts work, it just takes some time. So as the society, we love instant results, but if we have these protections on these guys, it works because the populations could come back if we're taking care of them. So because of everything going on in the world with less people on the beaches at the start of nesting season, 2020 has been a great nesting season so far. So we've had a lot more females come up onto the beach, lay their nests, no problem, because there's been less people out. So one thing, Mama Sea Turtle, when she's coming up to nest, if she feels spooked by anything, whether it's lighting, if it's sound, if it's a predator, she's gonna crawl right back to the ocean because she wants to give her eggs the best chance of survival. So if she gets scared when she's trying to nest, she'll actually crawl back to the ocean and wait to come back up because she was spooked. So those are what we call false crawls. So because of less people on the beach during the beginning of nesting season in 2020, we actually have had a huge number of nests, but that doesn't mean that we're gonna have more hatchlings, right? Remember, they have a 1 in 1,000 chance of survival to adulthood. And that's just a lot of the natural factors. So a lot of the natural predation on land and in the ocean. So just because we're doing better with the nesting doesn't necessarily mean that we'll have more hatchlings. So we will actually wait and see how nesting season ends for us, but so far it's looking really good. So Broward County Sea Turtle Conservation Program They also do these ride-alongs, so it's something that you could sign up for if you want to get involved. So you can go out with a turtler and see what it's like, what their day consists of. So going on the ATV on the beach, marking off any nests, if there's any mama turtles, if any of them get stuck, just making sure that everyone's keeping their space. Because if you do see a turtle, if you're out on the beach and you do see a mama sea turtle coming up to nest, you want to give her some space, right? And remember, they can't see the color red or orange, so make sure you have those red flashlights, because we don't want to spook her, because she won't lay her eggs if she's scared. So make sure you give her space, try to be quiet, because you don't want to make her scared, and you want to make sure that she lays those eggs, no problem, and then goes back out into the ocean. Nice job. We also do Adopt a Nest through National Save the Sea Turtle Foundation. So if you wanted to, you could head to their website and adopt a nest, which is really cool. And we also do hatching releases. So remember how I told you those hatchlings, when they begin to hatch, as they crawl up, the sand kind of goes underneath them and pushes them up to the top like an elevator? There are some hatchlings who don't make it out. If they don't hatch quick enough, that sand starts piling down. But what Broward County Sea Turtle Conservation Program does is they'll go out 2 days later and they actually excavate the nest. So 2 mornings later, they dig up the nest just to see if there's any stragglers who didn't make it out. They'll put them in a place safe for the day, and then they have these public releases later that night where people get to learn a little bit about sea turtles and then witness as the hatching releases back into the ocean. Those fill up really quickly, so they usually open up in March at the beginning of the nesting season. So make sure if you are interested, get a hold of Broward County Sea Turtle Conservation Program and reserve your spot today. Here at the MEEC, we are a small staff, so we are very reliant on our volunteers. They are a huge support for us. So if you guys are interested in volunteering, the age minimum requirement is 16 years old, and you are able to do all sorts of things here. So usually we start with people just kind of learning about Captain, talking to people at the pool, and then if you work your way up, you could also do the husbandry things. So you could feed Captain, you could work with her and do really cool things. So if you're interested in volunteering, please let us know. Email us at meek@nova.edu. Again, you have to be about 16 years old to volunteer with us. So that is the end of our Captain program of our sea turtle feeding. Thank you guys for hanging out. I hope you learned something new, and we will talk to you guys soon. Alright you guys, so now we're going to talk a little bit about plankton, one of the most important organisms on this planet. So plankton, it comes from the Greek word planktos, which means to wander or to drift. So these guys are tiny microscopic organisms that can live in both freshwater and saltwater, but they actually cannot swim. So they're kind of at the mercy of the currents and the waves and the tides. So they do have some adaptations that allow them to move up and down in the water column, but for the most part, they just kind of go with the flow. These guys are really cool because they are these tiny microscopic organisms, but they have such an important role in the marine food web. They actually make up the base of the marine food web. They're really important, not for the ocean, on land as well, and a lot of things will feed on them. The largest thing in the ocean, the blue whale, which can grow to be about 90 feet long, they are filter feeders. So they are baleen whales. They open their mouth, and as the water flows through them, they take out those tiny microscopic organisms and feed on them. The largest fish in the ocean, which is the whale shark, which can grow to be about 43 feet long, they are also filter feeders. So they are a really important part of our marine ecosystem. If we were to collect all of the plankton in the salt water, so all those tiny microscopic organisms, put them on a scale, and we were to collect everything else in the ocean and put that on a scale, plankton accounts for about 95% of all biomass in the ocean, which is insane. But if we were to find a drop of salt water, there would be hundreds, if not thousands, of those tiny microscopic organisms. Now they also play an important role in carbon storage. So they do take in carbon, and when they die, they sink down to the bottom, and it actually takes the carbon back down to the bottom of the ocean, which it can then be recycled back into the food web. They also do recycle nutrients as well, so they're a really key component, but the most important thing that our plankton provide is oxygen. Specifically our phytoplankton. We do have 2 types of plankton, phytoplankton, which is plant plankton, and zooplankton, which is animal plankton. So we'll talk about our phytoplankton first. They're very similar to our land plants, where they do photosynthesis. So that means they make their own food using energy from the sun, and they release oxygen as a byproduct. Their oxygen release, it can account anywhere from 65 to 80% of all the oxygen we breathe on Earth. So that's more than our land plants. But it kind of makes sense when you think of our planet, because our planet is mostly covered in salt water. Our phytoplankton, since they do photosynthesis, they like to stay near the surface. Since they can't really swim, they hang out near the surface using different adaptations like air sacs, cilia, things like that, where they can hang out near the sun so that they can make their own food. So they are primary producers, or autotrophs. They are also a very important food source for our zooplankton. So they're going to be our primary consumers. Those are animal plankton. They can either stay plankton form their whole life, or they will be juveniles, so they'll be babies as plankton, and then they'll turn into a jellyfish, or a mola mola, or a glaucus, which is a sea slug. So they are also really important because they are a prime food source like krill. So when we think of our blue whales and our whale sharks, that's really what they like to eat. Our zooplankton are going to be a little bit bigger than our plant plankton, but one of the coolest things about our zooplankton is that since they're such a prime food source for a lot of our organisms, they actually can control where they are in the water column. So during the daytime, when our phytoplankton or our plant plankton is up at the surface photosynthesizing, so creating their own food using energy from the sun, our zooplankton, in order to avoid their predators, will actually migrate down to deeper waters. They also kind of have a see-through body, which also helps them kind of avoid predators as well. Now, once it starts turning nighttime, so the sun goes away, our phytoplankton are no longer creating their own food. That's when our zooplankton actually migrate up in the water column. It's called diel vertical migration. It is the largest migration of any animal because they do it every single night. So they'll migrate up to the surface, again, using air floats, oil, air sacs, cilia, flagella, and their body shape to migrate up, feed on those phytoplankton, and then once it starts turning daytime again, they migrate back down to avoid their predators. So one of the things we're going to do today, after we collect our plankton sample and check it out underneath the microscope, you guys are actually going to create your own zooplankton models using different adaptations like the air float or cilia, little projections, increasing the surface area so that you can see why having these adaptations and having that ability to move in the water column really benefits them. So we're going to grab our plankton tow net and we're going to head out to the ocean next and we're going to grab a plankton sample. All right, everyone, so now we're going to take our plankton tow net. We're actually going to head out to the beach and we're going to collect a sample. So this net is really cool. You can see it's a circle just like this. I have this nice long string attached to it, and at the bottom it's going to be our collection bottle. So this is a very, very fine, kind of like a cheesecloth, a strainer, and basically what it's going to do, it's going to have the water go through it, but it's not going to let those microscopic organisms escape. So when you are doing the tow net, what you want to do is you want to hold it about 2/3 submerged in the water, so you want to leave a little bit of space on top, and you want to drag it through the water. Now you want to keep it to the side of you because all that plankton, you don't want to disturb it. So if I were to keep it right behind me as I move through the water, I'm going to make all the plankton move. So I'm actually going to keep it to the side and I'm going to make really nice wide turns with it. Again, so I'm not just going in the same area and then disturbing all the plankton, and then I wouldn't have any in my net. So if you guys are ready, we're going to head down to the beach and we're going to do a plankton tow net. So now that we're here, as you can see, we're right at the ocean, right on Hollywood Beach. So we're going to take this net through and we're going to actually find some plankton samples. And then once we finish collecting all of our plankton samples, we'll head upstairs and check it out underneath the microscope. of the algae, the macroalgae, so what we can see with our naked eye. But we're gonna go head up, check out the microscope, and see what microalgae or what plankton we can see. So follow me this way. All right, so now that we have our plankton sample from our tow net, what we do is we're using a microscope. We're going to actually place our plankton sample onto our petri dish just to see if we can see anything. Just looking in the water, I can see some things moving. I do see some sediment, I do see some algae pieces, but it does look like something's in there. Now remember, we did go out in daytime, and usually at the surface our phytoplankton is going to be there, whereas our zooplankton likes to migrate to those deeper waters just to avoid predation. So chances are we'll have mostly phytoplankton when we do pop this under the microscope. Whenever you use microscopes, you want to make sure that you're handling them carefully. So we always store them with this nice protective case just to keep the lens safe, make sure the glass is okay, nothing gets scratched. You always want to plug it in, make sure it's working, like so. Awesome. So I'm just going to drop a little bit underneath there and see what we can find. And remember, we're going to try and see if we see any of those adaptations, like the float, like the cilia, things like that, that can help us make our own plankton when we then do our activity. All right, so we are using a dissection microscope. It really just helps us get a nice up-close view of that plankton. I do see quite a few things moving here. I do see, oh man, something moving super fast. And that's always the challenge of trying to look at these guys under the microscope, because they're still moving. And I see a lot of that see-through body that I talked about before, so a lot of those organisms that will try to blend in with their environment. And then we do have these awesome ID guides that kind of help figure out if it's a phytoplankton or if it's a zooplankton. I see quite a few of these elongated ones, which I'm going to assume is some sort of phytoplankton. This one's so cool. There's one that kind of looks like a butterfly, so it looks like it has two wings with a central connection point. I've never seen that before, and I don't know if I'll be able to ID it. But that's one of the cool things about plankton, is that you can look up all these cool resources online. So this just breaks down our phytoplankton. Here is more of that phytoplankton that we'll see in the Atlantic. And then I do have some zooplankton ones. Again, probably not going to see those just because we did go out in the daytime, and I was only in about rib deep water, so not too deep for those guys to go migrate down there. Good. All right, so now that you guys kind of know what these animals look like, what we're going to do, we're actually going to take either some of the inspiration that you saw on these guides or just using your imagination. You're going to try and create a zooplankton that is able to migrate. So you want to make sure that they have that buoyancy so that they can control themselves up and down the water column. And actually the point of this is to see how slow does your animal migrate down to the bottom. So using your silly putty, you're going to go ahead and create whatever kind of creature you want. Remember those adaptations like the air sacs, the appendages coming off of it, the increased surface area for the body size. Keep that in mind. And then using your jar, this is obviously a little bit bigger, but using your jar, what you're going to do, once you make your animal, you're just going to see how fast, or really how slow, your animal migrates down to the bottom. The slower, the better. So whenever you guys are ready, go ahead and start creating those zooplankton.